Hello out there. I wanted to talk to you today about another subject of great importance to our nation. It is what I call religion as social foundation. Religion as social foundation. There's an organization out there that proudly announces itself that it is opposed to religion. It calls itself the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It is, as it terms itself on its own website, the voice for free thought, that is atheism, agnosticism, and skepticism. Actually, those are as much religions as anything else that it claims that it is separating itself from, because religion is essential to every and all society, simply because religion is just an old-fashioned word for worldview. There exists no society that does not have some kind of a foundational sense of why life exists as it does, what the challenges are that come with that life, what the procedures and plans are to the goals in meeting those challenges, and also the rules, ethical, moral rules that are required of people in order to be able to pull together and operate as a single society in unity in meeting those. Those are its religions or worldview, however you want to call it. And there is no society that is free from that, because it couldn't function as a society unless it had fundamental worldviews. And yes, atheism is one of them. We'll look at that in a second. Christianity has long been that very foundation for Western society. Winston Churchill, in fact, when he wrote his histories of Western society, he called it Christian civilization. Now, admittedly, there are lots of versions and varieties of Christianity, and oftentimes they fought to. But also there's a huge section of the world led by Islam, which, by the way, also has a number of sub-varieties, but we still identify and understand them as Islam, for they instruct a good part of the world as to what is the fundamental purpose of life, who's in charge of it, what are the powers and the forces that direct existence, and what their response to that should be. Same with Buddhism, which also has a number of sub-varieties. And in India, Hinduism. Even the Hindus recognize the fact that Hinduism isn't just a religion. It is indeed a worldview. It is very prescriptive in defining everyone's roles, especially to what the Portuguese came and discovered when they came to India as caste. And there are all kinds of different castes and subcastes, jati they're called, and very precise rules, and have religious understandings of why they exist as they do. All societies have religion. Now, what's happened, and this is, by the way, not new, it's old as the story of man himself. Modern religion has wanted to be its own God. It has wanted to be its own determiner and not tradition, because it sees, especially intellectuals, as being very progressive in taking on life and looking at it in new possibilities, especially ones that they've thought of at their desk, rationalizing all kinds of wonderful ways of improving and going at life, when in fact life turns out to be quite messy. And most religions acknowledge this fact because they've been around for a long time, trying to encourage people to find bravery, to find courage, to find strength to face the challenges of life, and some instruction along the way. But modern secularists plan to eliminate those, to do away with social problems, to find the perfect utopias and social solutions that will eliminate all these challenges. And having been a university professor myself for so many years, I'm well aware of that community and how it likes to sit at its desk and think up perfect solutions and be absolutely, completely out of touch with what the rest of the world has to do by way of daily life. I want to quote you from my second volume here, America's Rise to Greatness Under God, about what some humanists did, secular humanists, in the 1930s, they came out with the Humanist Manifesto. Now, remember, early 1930s, this came out in 1933, was in the early stages of a very dark depression. Capitalism, which had been kind of a god in the 1920s, had clearly failed. Fascism is on the rise. Mussolini, Stalin with his communism in Russia. Everything seemed to be up for grabs. And so this group of intellectuals came forward and created their own manifesto. And I'm going to read extensively. I'm sorry. This is from page 182, 183, and the beginning of 184. Bear with me, but I think you'll find this important. This is called Liberal Humanism versus Traditional Christianity. Meanwhile, all this economic stress was also shaking the very spiritual foundations of the country. What had happened to America? It seemed almost as if America's God had failed the country. In fact, who exactly was at fault? And what seriously, at this point, could be done to get the country up and moving again? The very popular early 20th century American philosopher John Dewey, who more than anyone else shaped modern American liberal views on education and social reform, was a self-avowed humanist who believed completely in the power of human logic and man's basic goodness. There was no place in his worldview for God, although he did not attack the idea directly. He simply moved on past the idea of God to build his ideas of secular, liberal reform entirely around the notion of man's instinctive logic and good intentions. In this, he was very typical of a growing segment of intellectual America. To Dewey's way of thinking, Christianity needed to be pushed out of its central position as the foundational worldview of Western society and culture in order that the way could be made for the birth of a new religion, a secular religion, originally identified as humanism, referred to more often today as secularism or just simply secularism. Subsection: the 1933 Humanist Manifesto calls for a new religion. In 1933, 34 individuals well placed in the world of academics, the publishing industry, and Unitarian ministry published a Humanist Manifesto calling for a new religion and an accompanying social order focused on the powers of man. Among those signers was, unsurprisingly, John Dewey. The goal of the Humanist Manifesto was to take up the responsibility of restoring a bright light of human optimism in the midst of a very gloomy Great Depression America. The manifesto declared that the time had passed for, quote, mere revision of traditional attitudes, unquote. It was a time to come to terms with, quote, new conditions created by a vastly increased knowledge and experience, unquote. Thus, long quote, any religion that can hope to be a synthesizing and dynamic force for today must be shaped for the needs of this age. To establish such a religion is a major necessity of the present. By the way, I break from this. Please notice they are identifying what they are doing as building a new religion. We continue. The manifesto's 15 affirmations made clear the specifics of this necessary new religion. Quote, religious humanism. That's the term they used. Its beliefs were, here we go, no creation, but simply self-existent creation. Man as an evolved natural creature. Truth only through scientific study. The end to theistic, parentheses, God-based religion. Social concern and service to replace the self-serving profit motive of capitalism. The need to embrace life rather than flee from it. Now here, seeing traditional religion, this is my part, as the famous psychiatrist Freud claimed it to be, as escapist in nature. Of particular interest are several of the manifesto's affirmations. In the 9th affirmation, it claims that humanists will replace, quote, old attitudes involved in worship and prayer, unquote, with a, quote, heightened sense of personal life and a cooperative effort to promote social well-being. In the 10th affirmation, the humanists proclaim in their humanism, there will, quote, there will be no uniquely religious emotions and attitudes of the kind hitherto associated with belief in the supernatural, unquote. In the 11th affirmation, they claim that in approaching life's crises, employing, quote, reasonable and manly attitudes, unquote, acquired through education, their version of education, of course, that their religious humanism, quote, will take the path of social and mental hygiene and discourage sentimental and unreal hopes and wishful thinking, unquote. In the 13th affirmation, they make it very clear that the intent of religious humanism is to remake the religious life of the nation around their modern religious ideals and to see that particular traditional church practices and activities, quote, be reconstructed as rapidly as experience allows in order to function effectively in the modern world, unquote. It is very important to note that the humanists of the 1930s were well aware that in their fervor for humanism, they were pushing for the establishment of a new religion in America. They intended at the time to do so simply by appealing to the common sense of a greatly distressed American people, thanks to the Depression, to see that the old days were gone. It was time to go modern. But things did not ultimately go that way. World War II came, the Depression consequently disappeared. America came out of that war victorious and ever stronger in its Christian faith. This was not the way the humanists wanted to see things go, and did not give up their battle. But instead of appealing to the American people, they eventually went to the federal courts, complaining that Christianity's central place in America, in American culture, was in violation of the Constitution's separation of church and state, their own and Jefferson's interpretation of the words of the First Amendment. We have a footnote quoting exactly the wording. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. I think they're trying to establish a religion. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And they're clearly trying to prohibit the free practice of Christianity. Or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That is exactly the First Amendment as it is written. Again, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. We continue. And therefore, something not religious, like supposedly their secular humanism, should properly be the only foundational cultural principle supported and defended by the federal courts. In this quest, the humanists got the Supreme Court finally to bow to the humanist viewpoint in the 1971 case of Lemon versus Kurtzman. In that case, the idea that secular humanism was itself a fundamental worldview or religion was not mentioned, of course. The embarrassing 1933 Humanist Manifesto, which would have made a complete lie of the humanist position in the case, was conveniently overlooked. And the humanists, were quick in 1973 to come out with Humanist Manifesto number 2. which drops the affirmation that what the humanists are trying to do is pure religion and instead recasts humanism as simply scientific truth. But all religions are about what a community sees as fundamental truth, the kind of truth that everything else about their society's norms and laws flow from faithfully. But anyway, there it is, the 1933 Humanist Manifesto, admitting that it is seeking avidly to bring America to a new religion. All right, that's from my book. Certainly, the Constitution provided for a wall of separation, as Jefferson, who, by the way, had no hand in all in writing the Constitution. He was off representing America as an ambassador to France at the time. That was his own invention, but he wasn't completely wrong in the idea that there is a wall of separation, but the wall was designed to keep the state out of the business of religion. It's very clear in the First Amendment. Now, that didn't mention the Supreme Court, it only mentioned Congress, but that was because they thought at the time it would be Congress, not the Supreme Court, that would be writing the laws or rewriting the laws of the land. And they said Congress shall make no laws concerning the establishment of religion nor the prevention of the free exercise thereof. There was a wall designed to protect religion from the state. And we're getting quite the opposite. The federal judiciary, the lawyers in black robes, as I call them, ACLU's learned it only takes a handful, no more than 5 at the most, and you can also find district courts where there's just one judge who will rule in their favor to make sure that Christianity is hidden and only scientific, that is secular worldview, is allowed to be passed on to the next generation. And we're starting to see the signs of that. Folks, we got a real problem here. The federal court itself is violating our own Constitution. This is a serious problem because, as you will see, I'm going to talk more about what exactly Christianity's contribution to Western civilization has been. Secular humanism has come to us in the 20th century in very interesting forms, such as communism or Marxism in the Soviet Union, and Maoism in China, and Cuba, and now Venezuela's trying it. There's no God in their world. There's only planning, social planning. It's called socialism, by intellectuals who have set themselves up to be what only God can be, which is a counselor to each and every one of us individually, except these individuals can't counsel us individually. All they can do is write programs and laws and set things up and reward us or punish us. This is not democracy. This is not America even. And we've allowed it to happen. So I've written my books. And so I'm presenting these castings to you. America, wake up and help me get ourselves back on the foundations that America was originally set out on. So help us, God. Thank you very much. Have a great day.